Hello and welcome. I'm Nic Andrew, Managing Executive of Nedgroup Investments. And at Nedgroup Investments, we manage over 450 billion of clients' assets. And central to what we do is really trying to help clients achieve their goals. And many of those clients, their key goal is trying to make sure that they enjoy a successful and comfortable retirement. But it's not always that easy, because knowing where to start amongst all the complexity, the noise, and the jargon can be very daunting. And it's also difficult to know, with all the different variables, what's the most important thing to focus on. So what I'm hoping to share over the next 20 minutes is many of the lessons and some of the research that we've done over the past few decades to try to share what some of those key insights are that can help you enjoy a comfortable retirement. In this session, we're going to share some of those lessons and the proven strategies that can make a meaningful difference, and particularly trying to identify the variables that make the biggest impact. And so you'll discover, by focusing on those things, how you can improve the probability of enjoying a successful retirement. We'll show how to check that you're on track. If you're not on track, how you can get back on track, and also how to make sure that you avoid some of those common and costly investment mistakes. And then at the end, we'll allow you to sign up for your own personal retirement readiness assessment. Please remember to post any questions that you have in the chat, and our team will make sure that they answer those. But I'm not alone today. I've got two experts, and the thing that is common amongst them is they're both absolutely passionate about helping clients make better investment decisions. So great to have you here, Seugnet. Seugnet brings almost 2 decades of industry experience. She is the driving force behind our recent thought leadership series of Retirement Reimagined. And in particular, Seugnet has brilliant expertise of looking at the complexity of investment behavioral decisions and how one combines that into practical steps to ensure that we end up in better financial positions. And I'm also joined by Tracy Jensen. Tracy's a qualified actuary, also has lots of industry experience. And what she's really good at is doing detailed, complex financial calculations in the back end, and then presenting that in a nice, simple way that we can understand. And particularly, Tracy's passionate about identifying practical steps that can improve our financial outcomes. So it's fantastic to have you both here. I'm going to hand over to you, Tracy, and particularly I know you're going to focus on 3 key insights which can make a massive difference in improving the retirement scenario for individuals.
Thanks, Nic, for those great introductions. So, growing up, our family went on a lot of journeys, long journeys, because we always had grandparents on the other side of the country. So we were either going from Cape Town to Durban or Joburg to Cape Town. And on these trips, I was going to say my dad was, but he still is very adventurous. And he would always plan the most interesting stops, which I don't know how he did without Google, but we would stop at Carnarvon or Trompsburg or Hanover and the most random places. But I learned a lot of things on these trips. So before you go on a trip like that, there's a few things you need to plan. And I thought that was a really good analogy for our retirement journey we want to go on. So imagine you're leaving Joburg and your aim is to get to Cape Town by the time you retire, your dream destination where you want to enjoy that lifestyle you've worked so hard for. So before you go on this journey, one of the first things you do is you fuel up. If you only put 20 liters in your car or your motorbike, no matter how fuel efficient it is, you're just not going to make it to Cape Town. And that's very much like your retirement fund contributions. Every month you need to make a contribution, and that needs to be sufficient to get you to your destination. Then the second thing you want is a fuel-efficient vehicle. So if you have a more modern vehicle that's very efficient, you can probably make it to Beaufort West before you need to refuel. But if you're driving a really old, maybe a 30-year-old Jeep, something that uses a lot of fuel, maybe halfway to Beaufort West, you're going to run out and you're going to need to refuel earlier. So this is the amount of growth assets you have, and you want to have sufficient growth assets because that is what makes your vehicle fuel efficient. So these are things like shares, property, equity, And if you don't have enough, you're going to have to top up more. And the final part of your trip is ideally not having high wind resistance. And you can think of that as having high costs. If it's extremely windy and you're driving against the wind, I mean, for those who've flown, you'll have the similar thing. Sometimes it takes you half an hour longer to get there. So you'll take longer to get there, and you also need more fuel. So to summarize that all, on your retirement journey, you want to fuel up, ideally drive an efficient vehicle, and you want to minimize wind resistance. So I know, Seugnet, you and your family recently planned a trip to the Karoo. So I thought that's a good place to start with. How do you know on your retirement journey how much fuel you need to put in?
Yeah, I mean, I can fully relate to that analogy. Traveling to the Karoo with 2 small kids, which is often referred to as the middle of nowhere, takes a bit of planning. I mean, the reality is the further away you travel from Cape Town into the Karoo, the higher the risk that this petrol station that you saw on Google Maps will either be closed by the time you arrive or maybe don't have petrol for you. So we actually made the call to not first empty our tank and then rely on Fraserburg to have petrol at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening. And we actually regularly filled up as we passed a decent place that could give us the fuel. And this is very similar to your retirement savings. I mean, the fuel is your monthly contribution or how much you're putting away per year for your retirement savings. And you can think of it this way: the earlier you start filling up, the higher the likelihood, or even close to a guarantee it is, that you'll make it to your retirement destination with more than enough fuel in the tank. Or the more you fill up early on, again, same outcome, like quite a good probability of retiring comfortably. And to put some practical numbers behind this, let's think of you as a retirement saver in terms of how old you are. If you're 25 years old, you need to put away 18% of your total income per year, your gross annual income. At 25, you've got time and the power of compounding on your side, so 18% is quite low, quite sustainable. If you wait until you're 45 and you only start saving at 45, that 18% becomes 56%. Which is high. The other reality of being mid-40s is your expenses are also high. Home loans, school fees, or in my case, feeding 2 growing boys with my grocery bills. I can't afford 56% of my salary. What that teaches us is, if you are in your 30s, don't wait until you're 40 thinking, I'll earn enough in 10 years' time to save for retirement. Start. But if you are in your mid-40s already and you haven't yet started to save for your retirement, also don't be discouraged. You must still start, get started, get all the right other tools in place, because this other lever that you can pull is to extend your retirement at the end. So you can make up some of the power of compounding then at the end of your retirement. And the other thought I had now about our road trip is we did take the worst car possible. We took my husband's Jeep, which is highly fuel inefficient because it also has big 4x4 tires. So it made our planning quite tricky to make it to the Karoo.
Yeah, that actually makes me think of our second point, which is how fuel efficient is your vehicle. And that translates to the percentage of growth assets. So shares and property you have locally and internationally. And the more growth assets you have, the more fuel efficient, so to speak, your vehicle is. And that's something you can actually check on your investment statement or in your portfolio. How much do you have in growth assets? Now, this is so important. If you're not hitting your target, so ideally you would like about 75% in growth assets or more. I mean, it's not an exact science, but ballpark, that's where you want to be. And if instead you are nervous about markets, because we all know, we see the shares, they're up and they're down, and it is quite a roller coaster ride sometimes. But if you're nervous and you choose to go with a lower equity, let's say about half, 40% in shares and property, you have to save twice as much over your whole working life to get to your same destination, Cape Town in our analogy, than you would have. Or put another way, if you don't fuel up, like your trip to the Karoo, I mean, you will break down, so to speak, at retirement halfway there if you haven't fueled up. So that's just a really nice analogy to keep in mind. If you are very nervous, there is a cost to it, and you want as fuel efficient engine as possible when going on on such a long trip. Which actually made me think of one of our most, I'll say memorable now, worse at the time trips, as memories normally go, to Carnarvon. And in fact, when we left in the morning, my mom said, "Good riddance, I never want to see this godforsaken place again." We ended up going back 2 or 3 times because of flat tires and a off the beaten track route that we took. But the point is, the reason she was so happy to leave was, and I don't think I've ever experienced winds like that in my life. We decided to camp. We're not a family of campers. We decided to camp. So we got this tent. We honestly thought the tent was going to lift off. I don't think any of us slept that night. In fact, my dad parked, we had a big microbus combi, also not fuel efficient, in front of the tent to try help with the wind. But the point is, on that trip, there was so much wind resistance and the car is big, so it's not exactly aerodynamic, which had an impact on our planning. And I know you have a good analogy to link that to in our retirement journey.
I mean, the way I always think about it is, I suppose, like a cyclist or a triathlete. If the race day conditions is expected to be windy, these athletes absolutely obsess about how aerodynamic the bike is. You know, certain bottle cages, certain bottle positions, handlebars, etc., to make sure that on the day, if there is going to be a lot of wind, the bike at least can move as well as possible through the wind and still perform well. And this for me is such a good way to think about fees. If your total investment costs of your retirement vehicle is high, it's the exact same as having a high wind resistance on race day. It eats into fuel without delivering the performance. And again, just to put some numbers to it, if you are saving for retirement, you will pay a fee per year for that investment vehicle. Now, every little bit of saving helps, but just to keep it simple, let's use a saving of going from 2% per year total investment cost down to 1% per year. Now, you don't have to do anything other than change what you're using, so it's not costing you anything today, but by saving from 2% to 1% per year, you can literally give yourself a 30% increase in retirement. So if you change your fees from 2 to 1%, instead of starting your retirement maybe earning 10,000 Rand, you can start your retirement by earning 13,000 Rand per month. There's no one number, like you said, with the 75% growth assets, but we do think that 1.5% roughly per year in investment costs is about like the golden number that'll really help you get that vehicle go as efficient as possible. Now, I suppose the next question is, how do I do it? How do I get this discount? At Nedgroup Investments, we have the Nedgroup Investments Core Diversified Fund, which is a fund that has 75% of growth assets, so it ticks that bucket, and it also only costs 70 basis points per year, so 0.7%. So this fund is a very good example of how you can bring the discount in, reduce your cost, while maintaining the right level of growth assets.
So I love the way that you made it practical, and I think that's really where we want to go to now, is how do we bring together these 3 things? We've been talking in analogies, but how do we take a real case? So I want to talk to you about Megan, who's in her mid-30s, and she's been very diligently saving. She would like to retire at 65. She's saved up 1.5 million Rand so far, and every month she contributes 6,000 Rand a month. As she gets salary increases, she increases that, and she's currently earning 50,000 a month. But she is really nervous about markets, and I know Seugnet deals with a lot of people and queries like this, so she's gone into what we call a low equity fund. So that has about 40% in growth assets, and her total costs are 2%. So she's come to us and said, okay, how does my retirement journey look? Am I going to make it to Cape Town? So one of the key things, I guess a good rule of thumb, is to look at what you expect your salary to be just before you retire. And we obviously talk to things in real or today's money, because with inflation, I mean, it's very hard to compare. But for her, typically South Africans actually get salary increases, maybe not recently, because I'm sure many on the call are thinking, I haven't got a salary increase above inflation for a while. But in the long run, you know, we do in South Africa tend to get higher increases. So Megan's 50,000 just before she retires would probably be closer to 66,000. So she wants to aim for about 75% of that after retirement, because hopefully some of your costs, like you said, hopefully in your case, your boys who are eating a lot are on their feet. And so your costs do tend to reduce a little bit. So a good target is to aim for 75% of your salary as a retirement income. So if we look at Megan, to her question, is she going to get to Cape Town? She's on track to get 22,000, and she's going to be earning about 66,000 just before retirement. So you can see she's well off despite being diligent, saving a lot every month, already having saved 1.5 million. So how do we take these 3 steps? As I say, things that are simple are not always easy to do, but how do we take these 3 and apply to Megan? Well, firstly, if we can increase her growth assets to about that 75%, that golden rule, we can already take her income to about 34,000 in today's money at retirement, which is nice, but still quite far off our 66. If she then reduces her costs, similar to the example you gave, from 2% to 1%, she's at 44,000. So we've already doubled, without her contributing anything more, doubled her projected retirement income just by applying those 2. And then ideally she needs to fuel up a little bit. She's contributing 6,000. If she can manage to find an extra 2 and get to 8,000, she'll be on track to get 51,000 a month. And remember, she's going to earn 66 just before she retires. So that is ticking our 75% rule of thumb. So we've gone from a really terrible place, applied those 3 concepts, and now Megan is actually able to get to a good position. If you can apply those first 2, where you don't contribute a cent more over your entire working life, typically you can go to having 2.5 times more income in retirement. So if for every 10,000 you were going to get, you can now get 25,000 a month in retirement. So it's very, very powerful applying that concept. And we want to take this and make this practical, because Megan is just one example. Not all of you are in your mid-30s, not all of you are contributing that, not all of you have that income. So Sune, I really wanted to ask you, how do the people who are listening actually take this and go, am I on track? Where should I be on my journey from Joburg to Cape Town?
Sure. So again, like there's this number at the end that we're all aiming for, which is on the day that you retire, you should have 17 times your final salary saved up in retirement savings. And if you miss this mark, maybe you're only at 14 times or 15 times. To go back to the analogy, it means you're retiring in Matjiesfontein and not Cape Town. Like really nice and really charming, but not quite the lifestyle you dreamt of. But again, for me to tell a 30-year-old you need 17 times in 35 years' time doesn't really mean much to the listeners. And thankfully, we're now in a stage similar to the technology where there is no longer just this paper map. We actually have a Google Maps along the way. So instead of your dad just checking the map once and off you go, we can now check Google Maps to see how far have we come, how much longer do we have left to go. Sometimes to my irritation, because my kids ask me every 2 minutes how much longer. But in the retirement savings, which is quite useful, Tracy, is you can check based on how long you still have until retirement. So if you have 20 years before you want to retire, you should have about 5 times your annual salary saved up already. So if you're earning 500,000 Rand a year, your gross annual income is 500,000, and you have 20 years to go, your retirement savings should be around 2.5 million. When you're 10 years to retirement, that should be at 10 times. So 10 million for every 1 million you're earning at a gross annual salary. Or if you're 5 years to retirement, that needs to be around the 13 times level. So these are quite useful measures where you can see, where am I now in terms of my age? How much longer do I have to work? Am I ahead or behind my milestones? And then if you're behind your milestones, as Tracy said, there's a few key things you can do to get yourself closer. Or if you're at your milestones, that means you can cruise comfortably, you can sit back and just keep doing what you're doing to stay on track. And it's really, like just always the other thing I think about from a like checking your milestones perspective, it is just really important to keep in mind that the journey from Joburg to Cape Town is very long. Don't be the 6-year-old that asks every 1 minute, how much longer? You're going to drive yourself crazy. Just be aware that investments and markets take time. It's a long journey, but use the power of your statements and your values and these milestones to check in a reasonable manner, quarterly, annually, to just see how you're doing.
Great. Tracy and Seugnet, thank you very much for that. I must say, I love the analogy of from Joburg to Cape Town. My enduring memory of one of my trips was as a student, where we all packed ourselves in the car and then refused to put on the air conditioning because we want to try to save some money. But let's just recap, because I think there were some really good insights. There were three things that you mentioned. You said you want enough fuel, which is all around contributions. The more you put in, the further you can get. And a good rule of thumb is if you can contribute around about 18% over your working career. The second was a fuel-efficient vehicle. So making sure you've got enough in growth assets. And when we mean that, we mean shares and equity. And again, the rule of thumb is to try to make sure that you've got around about 75% in growth assets, because relative to having 40%, which is typically a low equity solution, you would end up with double as much in retirement. And finally, to minimize your wind resistance, or to the amount of friction. Both the first two factors benefit from positive compounding. Friction is all about reducing the negative compounding. And again, a good rule of thumb there is to try to keep your total costs at around or under 1.5% per annum. And so I think it was quite amazing, because if we can get those three things right, which I think potentially not that difficult, especially two of them, because they don't involve an increase in contribution, you can actually double the amount that you can have in retirement. And that to me is just absolutely phenomenal. So my suggestion is to check if you're on track is, first of all, review your total contributions. Secondly, check your total asset allocation towards growth assets. And then just check how much are you actually paying on your investments. And you can do this all on your investment statement. If you're a Nedgroup Investments client, you can log in and see it on the website. So here's to the next step. If you're not sure whether you're on track or how much you're likely to have in retirement, or if you want to get back on track, what we're going to do is show a QR code, and if you scan that, we'll call you and give you your personalized retirement readiness assessment. We'll help you understand your position and give you clear, practical tips on how to get back on track. So look out for the call tomorrow, and just a heads up, it will probably come from a number that looks like a call center. So be sure to answer the call, because this could be the most important call that you've made. And thank you very much. We hope you found the analogy interesting and entertaining, but also at the same time useful and practical. Thanks very much.